Francesco Totti, the living icon of AS Roma and of Italian football, is not only the only player in history to stay loyal to one club for his entire career, but also a model of talent, spirit, and loyalty. Over a career spanning more than 25 years, he played more than 780 matches for Roma, scoring 37 goals a club, all-time record, leading the team to the Serie A title in the 2000-2001 season after more than 18 years of waiting, winning 2 Coppa Italia titles, 2 Supercoppa Italiana titles, and earning numerous individual honors such as the Serie A top scorer in 2006-2007, the European Golden Shoe in 2007, and multiple inclusions in the Serie A Team of the Year. He was celebrated as the symbol of AS Roma and the spiritual leader of the Italian national team, where he scored 9 goals in 58 matches and helped Italy win the 2006 World Cup, having also been called up for Euro 2000 and the 2002 World Cup. Famous for his magical assists, exquisite shots, the no-look pass technique, and unbelievable chip shots, he embodied the fighting spirit and creativity on the pitch. It was precisely his loyalty, steadfastness to Roma, and love for the city that made him a legend, a true king of Rome, whom every fan acknowledges. But behind those glittering titles lay silent pain, invisible pressure, and an iron will. Totti endured serious injuries, especially the broken leg in 2006 that nearly shattered his World Cup dream. He fought through daily pain, grueling recovery training, declining speed and strength, being relegated to the bench in his final years, feeling like he no longer belonged on the pitch, while witnessing the club change leadership and sensing distance in the very home he had served his whole life. Then came the shock of divorce after nearly 2 decades of a seemingly perfect family, relentless media scrutiny, overwhelming loneliness, and emotional wounds piling up. All of it nearly broke his heart multiple times. Yet Totti rose again, using extraordinary willpower to carry on, staying loyal to Roma, caring for his children, living for his family, and turning pain into inner strength, making every step on the pitch or in life after retirement proof of his resilience, courage, and undying love for football, for Roma, and for his own life. If Totti's journey has touched your heart, please hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapters full of tragedy and emotion. Francesco Totti grew up on the sun-drenched yet narrow streets of Rome, where every brick and every wall reminded him that he belonged here, that there was no other choice but to live and breathe with the city, where the heartbeat of his entire life would pulse to the rhythm of football. From childhood, Totti knew he was different from other kids, not in talent, but in the invisible responsibility tied to his small feet, a responsibility his mother Fiorella lovingly yet unwittingly placed on him, keeping him tied to Rome, to the pitches where he would become an icon, without ever letting him know that life could be bigger than these boundaries, that he could leave, fly far, and test himself in places that had never heard of him. Fiorella, the resilient mother, always shielded him from every danger, always held him in her warm embrace. But that very protection planted in Totti a quiet emptiness, a tragedy no one saw. He was never taught how to leave, only how to stay, how to love and sacrifice for a place his heart had been bound to since he first learned to run and jump. His first playgrounds, the streets near home, worn-out balls on the sidewalks became his sacred ground, where every moment of joy, every imaginary goal, every game with friends taught him about loyalty, about never being allowed to abandon, about holding on to what was called home, even before he knew what the wider world was like. Those childhood years passed in outward calm, but inner tension. Young Totti soon realized that every gaze following him wasn't just admiration, but expectation. A pressure a child was too young to fully grasp, where every mistake, every missed shot, every small loss was recorded in the city's invisible diary. Totti learned to listen to Rome, to respond to the cheers and the scoldings, to stand firm amid nameless expectations, to turn joy into duty, to live with the fear that if he ever left, if he ever failed, the city would no longer be his Rome. And in those scorching summer days, amid whistles, shouts, and balls smashing against walls, he gradually understood that he wasn't just playing for himself, but for an ideal he never chose: loyalty, sacrifice, and absolute attachment to the place he was born. That tragedy quietly grew, seeping into every run, every shot, every breath. Totti never knew what leaving felt like, never learned to face a path without Roma, without the Olimpico Stadium, without the fans he had dreamed of as a boy. And that excessive attachment created a vague fear, a lack of preparation for what would come when the final farewell to the pitch arrived, when he realized life beyond football would lack floodlights, lack roars, and he would have to find his own way forward, live with himself without a fixed address, without daily pride as fuel. That pain began in childhood, from never being allowed to leave, and followed Totti through his entire career, becoming the shadow beside every success, every goal, every title he won, reminding him that when you love a place, an ideal, a home too much, you also prepare yourself for the deepest loss. And in the eyes of the boy who once ran through Rome's streets, now a legend, there still shines a silent fear. When everything you know, everything you've given, and everything you love most begins to leave you, what must you do to survive? This is the persistent question Totti has carried every day, every goal, every assist, from boyhood to becoming the king of Rome, and the answer to that question is only revealed through every match, every season, every tear on the Olimpico pitch when he walked out for the last time, stepping into the roaring crowd yet feeling utterly alone. Right from the moment he learned to run and jump on Rome's old stone streets, Francesco Totti was no longer an ordinary child. The boy carried on his shoulders a responsibility that adults never issued a license for or gave instructions on how to endure, an invisible, immense responsibility where every missed shot, every wrong dribble, every loss in games with friends felt like it was written into the city's invisible diary. The city where Totti was born and raised, where every eye followed him, where hope wasn't just his own but belonged to millions of Roma hearts waiting for every run, every goal, every shining moment. Totti didn't just play for himself. He played for Rome, for those who placed faith in those young feet, for fans who had never met him yet, believed he would become an icon. And that very belief, from childhood, became a nameless burden, a pressure no child should have to bear, a fear that crept into every run, every shot, every breath. If I make a mistake, the whole city will be disappointed, and my heart will shatter. In those summer afternoons, when the sunlight reflected off the red-tiled roofs and the narrow streets echoed with the laughter of children, Totti never ran just for fun. He ran to prove, to uphold honor, to show that the hope Rome placed in him was not in vain. Every imaginary goal on the sidewalk, every shot against the base of a wall, he remembered like a lesson, a reminder that he had to be strong, had to be perfect, had to live with expectations no ordinary child ever had to carry. Deep inside him, the fear of failure was not a fleeting feeling, but an electric current running through every muscle, every heartbeat. The fear of letting others down became part of Totti's DNA, etched so deeply that he didn't know how to be weak, didn't know how to cry when he made a mistake, didn't know how to complain or let go. Everything had to be kept hidden, buried in his eyes, in his smile, in every decisive shot on the streets of Rome. And it was that very burden that shaped the man Totti would become, a legend not only because of his extraordinary technique or spectacular assists, but also because of the extraordinary endurance forged in childhood, where he was not allowed to cry, not allowed to stop running, not allowed to fail, where every step was a lesson in resilience. Every collision with friends was a chance to learn how to get back up, and every imagined cheer was a reminder that he belonged to a city, a belief, a symbol that no one had ever asked if he wanted. Totti's childhood was unlike any other child's. He grew up between two parallel worlds. On the outside there was laughter, sunshine, street football. But on the inside there was loneliness, pressure, the fear of not being allowed to fail, a silent, persistent fear that only the boy himself truly understood. And from that very fear, an extraordinary will was born, a fighting spirit that needed no guide, a self-discipline and endurance that later turned Totti into the King of Rome, but at the same time planted in him a silent pain that only when he stood before the Olimpico Stadium for the last time, with 70,000 people roaring and an empty heart, did Totti realize that throughout his entire childhood he had carried the weight of a whole city without ever being allowed to fall, and the price of that hope would be something he would pay for the rest of his life. When Totti entered adulthood, his talent had already broken beyond the borders of Rome, and major European clubs began to take notice. Among them, Real Madrid, one of the giants of world football, extending an invitation that any player would have to consider, a chance to become a global icon, to have his name stand alongside legends like Raúl, Zidane, and Ronaldo, to step into the spotlight of greatness that the whole world would bow to in admiration. But Totti refused. Not once, but many times, turning down every promise of international glory, rejecting the path millions of players dream of. This was not simply a career decision, not a weighing of benefits or fame. It was a fateful turning point where he placed his love and attachment to a city above everything, where choosing to stay with Roma meant closing off every other path, forfeiting the chance to become a global star, to leave a mark on European football history on a broader scale, to step beyond familiar boundaries and test himself on the stages any player dreams of. In that moment, the silent tragedy began to creep in. Totti didn't just choose Roma, he gave up everything he could have become, every opportunity that could have opened for his career and renown, every dream of glory beyond the familiar grass. Loyalty became a double-edged sword, both crowning him as the immortal symbol of Roma and confining him within narrow borders, where every advance was measured, every shot a test, and every victory never quite delivered the fullness that a global player could experience. Totti's pain didn't come from failure, but from knowing that any other path would be left behind, that all the greatest opportunities in the world had been buried in the choice of loyalty he never regretted, yet could not escape feeling the loss. He realized that every refusal was a door closing forever, that every goal, every assist, every win with Roma was pride, but also a reminder that the outside world kept moving forward, and he had not stepped into it. In the eyes of the boy who once carried the pressure of an entire city, now the eyes of a man who had come to understand that power, fame, and the admiration of a whole city could never replace a global experience, and that what he had given up would forever remain unanswered what-ifs. In Totti's heart, loyalty was never an easy choice. It was a burden, a test, something that bound him to the familiar pitch, to the boundaries where the light of the global stage was blocked off. Yet he stood firm, kept walking, kept giving, kept scoring, kept assisting, kept devoting everything to Roma despite the opportunities and titles he could have won elsewhere. Every season, every match, was proof of that fateful decision. He chose love, chose loyalty, chose the home his heart was tied to, but at the same time chose solitude, chose a path full of thorns that no one but himself could understand, and chose to live with the silent pain that the world beyond Rome would never know what he had given up, what he had sacrificed. And in every drop of sweat, every precise pass, every surge forward to finish or set up a teammate, Totti still carried the heart of Rome, his suppressed personal ambitions, the quiet regret for a life that could have been different. Yet he never regretted it, because in loyalty he found meaning, and in that meaning he became the King of Rome, the living symbol, the immortal legend, but also a man who carried in his heart a silent tragedy, a loss that only he understood. When you love too deeply, you also pay the price with everything you could have become if you had dared to leave. When Francesco Totti truly stepped into adulthood on the pitch, the title Il Capitano was no longer just a nickname, but the immortal symbol of Rome, both a shield and a crown at once, an imprint that the entire city etched into every brick of the Olimpico Stadium and into the heart of every fan, where the name Totti became synonymous with fighting spirit, loyalty, and the pride of a Roma that would never surrender. But behind that brilliance, he began to realize that glory did not mean freedom, that being at the center, no matter how powerful, was also a quiet prison, where every step was watched, every pass scrutinized, and every spectacular goal still could not break beyond the borders of the city he had chosen as his home. Totti had become the heart of Roma. Everything depended on him to lead the team, to bring joy, to defend honor. But the outside world looked at him and saw a genius player who had never truly stepped onto the European stage, where the Champions League, where the Ballon d'Or, where the titles recognized by the entire planet still eluded him. Every success he achieved was with Roma, for the people who had nurtured him since he was a boy, running on the streets. But precisely because of that, every time he looked at continental honors or saw other players receive international awards, he recognized the silent tragedy. He had achieved everything except the things the world uses to measure greatness. In Totti's mind, the loneliness did not come from a lack of love or hatred, but from knowing that beyond the grass of Rome, the world still judged and compared success by the titles he never owned. And no matter how many goals he scored, how many successful seasons he led Roma through, how many millions idolized him, he still felt an invisible void where his personal value and the value the world recognized never met. In every match, every season, Totti had to fight himself more than he fought his opponents. His heart and his legs seemed to carry a burden that no one but himself truly understood, the burden of loyalty, of undying love for Roma, of responsibility toward those who had placed their faith in him since he was a child. Every shot, every assist, every surge forward on the counterattack was not just an effort to score or beat the opponent, but Totti's way of reminding himself that, even if the outside world had not fully recognized him, he would still do everything to be worthy of the city's love. The tragedy lay in the fact that he had rejected the chance to go global. He had chosen the path of loyalty, but isolation, and the result was that he became a king in a small kingdom, an absolute peak in the heart of Rome, but an insurmountable limit compared to global standards of greatness. From the outside, Totti was the perfect model of a legend, the man who scored 307 goals, played more than 780 matches, led Roma to the Serie A title, 2 Coppa Italia titles, 2 Supercoppa Italiana titles, helped the Italian national team win the 26 World Cup, and received numerous individual honors. But inside, that peak contained a loneliness, an invisible pressure, and a silent question: was absolute loyalty worth it when it came at the cost of all the global glories he had given up? In those rare moments alone on the training pitch or in the locker room, Totti looked up at the Rome sky, where the sunlight fell on the Olimpico grass, and that light was both warm and a reminder that he had chosen a path no one else could walk with him, and that with every decision of loyalty, he had accepted the isolation, the loss, the emptiness that global titles would never fill. But what made Totti truly great was not what he gave up, but how he turned that pain into strength. The strength to keep playing, the strength to lift the team, the strength to become the living symbol of a city, the strength to etch his name into the hearts of millions of fans, and the strength to live fully with a choice he knew would forever tie him to Roma, tie him to the truest thing in his heart, even if it meant leaving behind what the world called the greatest. In every run, every goal, Totti carried both the tragedy and the tribute, becoming the king of a kingdom whose limits, loneliness, and true cost of loyalty only he fully understood, a peak full of glory, but also a prison that only he knew how to walk through. When Totti had become Il Capitano, the uncrowned king of Roma, the love that fans gave him was no longer just simple admiration, but gradually turned into an invisible burden, a persistent pressure where any moment of carelessness, a bad pass or a shot off target, felt like it challenged the faith of thousands of watching eyes, hundreds of thousands of watching eyes, and an entire city that placed its pride, expectations, and sometimes silent disappointment on his shoulders. Totti was never an ordinary player, but now every run, every dribble was not just a physical test, but a mental examination, where every mistake was scrutinized tenfold, where fans didn't just want to see him score, but wanted to see him perfect in every moment. And deep down, Totti felt that this love, though sweet, was turning into an invisible cage, where he was both cherished and imprisoned by the very affection of those who had lifted him to the top. That pressure quietly seeped into every training session, every match, every moment when the Olimpico rang with cheers and applause. He felt the heavy expectations on his shoulders, the fear of letting others down, the fear that one slip could shake the trust and love Rome had given him. There was no place to hide, no moment to be weak. Totti learned to turn that fear into competitive energy, learned to stand firm when every eye judged him, and learned to smile even when his legs were tired, his body ached, his mind knew that perfection was impossible for anyone, even for him. The love from the outside had now become a barrier, an invisible definition of duty that Totti had to carry, a trap where the deeper he went, the more trapped he felt between loyalty, fame, and expectations that never stopped. In those quiet moments, when the roaring crowd was gone, Totti looked in the mirror and realized he had been swept into an inescapable vortex. From love to pressure, from admiration to loneliness, from pride to mental burden. Every season, every match, every goal was no longer personal joy but responsibility, a challenge to his own heart, where others' love, though sincere, demanded absolute perfection, no room for mistakes, no permission to leave, always standing strong to be Roma's pride, and this created a pressure that no bonus or title could ever erase, an invisible chain that Totti had to learn to endure day by day. Those derbies, those decisive goals, those spectacular assists were not just moments of glory but proof of his extraordinary mental endurance. Every surge, every shot, every smile to the crowd was part of how he maintained the image of perfection. But deep inside, he felt an unshareable loneliness, a loneliness only he understood, that when love and expectation grow too big, they sometimes become shackles, holding him back, not allowing him to walk away, not allowing failure, not allowing the human inside to live freely. And even though that burden felt like it strangled him every day, Totti kept walking, kept giving everything, kept smiling in front of thousands of fans, kept scoring, kept assisting, kept doing all he could, because he understood that this love, even as it became pressure, was the only reason he became a legend, became Il Capitano, became the king of Rome. The pain turned into will, the pressure turned into strength, and even when love became an invisible cage, Totti stood firm, kept playing, kept living, and kept a pride for himself that no title in the world could match. In the summer of 2006, when the Rome sun reflected off the training ground's tiled roofs and the laughter of children echoed from the streets near the Olimpico, Francesco Totti, the heart and soul of AS Roma, went through a moment every player fears, but no one truly prepares for, a violent collision that left him with a horrific broken leg, a serious fibula fracture accompanied by ligament damage, and in an instant, his lifelong dream seemed to collapse. In that moment, he stood on the familiar grass, but the world seemed to turn upside down. every eye looking at him with worry and shock, and in Totti's mind, it felt like his career had just ended. Like all the goals, all the assists, all the glorious moments before the fans were buried in pain and helplessness. And he suddenly realized that just one break was enough to shatter the World Cup dream he had cherished since childhood. The screams of his teammates, the sound of the ambulance siren, the cold metal sensation on his skin as he was being stabilized, all of it formed a wall of pressure that no words could soothe. Totti's heart tightened with every beat, the fear of a career cut short spreading through his body. And for the first time, he realized that even though he had lived with pressure and expectations from an entire city, there were still moments when he was completely powerless, when his body, not his will, was the one in control. In the first days after the injury, Totti had to lie still in bed, watching sunlight stream through the window without being able to step onto the pitch, feeling every sharp stab of pain as a reminder that the legs which had once been his weapon, his life force, were now betraying him. Disappointment and despair flooded in, and the loneliness no one could share made him feel like everything had collapsed before his eyes, and in the silence of the room, he quietly asked himself, would he be able to stand up again? Would Roma still need him? Could the dream continue to live? But Totti, true to who he was, refused to give up. Day by day, hour by hour, through every painful physical therapy session, every limping step on the training ground, he turned pain into motivation, fear into will. When he returned after several months of recovery, he was no longer the boy or the player he had been before. His legs were no longer as agile. His speed had diminished. His explosive bursts were no longer absolute, but his heart and fighting spirit remained intact. Every dribble, every shot, every assist now carried the memory of a part of himself that had been lost, a piece of power the injury had stolen, and that made every achievement afterward, no matter how resounding, come with a silent, aching sting. The deepest insight from that moment was not about Totti returning to play, but about him realizing that sometimes surviving does not mean fully recovering. The body could heal, but the psychological threads, the fears, and the fragile sense of a career could still linger, quietly following him in every run, in every match, reminding him that even legends are human, and every goal, every assist from then on, was not just a victory on the pitch, but a battle against his own pain and limitations. And from that injury, Totti learned a profound lesson. Physical strength is not everything, and glory on the field is only the tip of the iceberg. What he had to fight for his entire life was his spirit, his resilience, his ability to rise after his body betrayed him, and above all, to keep his heart fully with Roma, with what he loved, even knowing that this choice of loyalty would always come with loss, pain, and a loneliness that only a legend could understand. Totti survived, stepped back onto the grass, but he was no longer whole. He became the image of a legend carrying a wordless pain, a winner in the game of his career, yet still facing silent wounds. And it was from this pain that he learned to turn every goal, every assist, every run into a declaration of will, of loyalty, and of love for Roma, a love that sometimes became shackles, but never made him give up. The final years of Francesco Totti on the pitch were unlike any period before. After the broken leg in 2006, his body began to betray him. Every run slowed. Every jump lost its power. Every dribble lost its absolute precision, and every match felt like an endless struggle between will and physicality, where the fans saw Roma's god still burning with strength. But Totti himself felt acutely that his body no longer belonged to the past, that endurance, speed, and sharpness had been eroded by time and injury. He still took the field, still wore the captain's armband, still ran on the grass he loved, but inside, loneliness and a quiet sense of loss seeped into every heartbeat, turning every shot. every assist into a declaration of sheer survival instinct rather than pure joy of victory. A younger generation of players began replacing the key positions Totti once held, their vibrant legs and ambition making him feel pushed further to the edge. The Olimpico, once the place he ruled, now reminded him that legends too must stand on the sidelines, that age and injury spare no one, and the fear that he no longer belonged on the pitch simmered every time a teammate ran faster, every time the referee called a foul for his slowness, every time the cheers no longer belonged solely to his every touch but shifted to new faces. With each passing season, Totti felt decline not just in his body, but in his soul, the feeling that he was still there, but no longer the center, no longer the one dictating the rhythm of the game, no longer the immortal figure he once dreamed of being, and that pain, though quiet, cut deeper than any injury. In the locker room, under dim lights shining on the wooden floor, Totti sat alone, staring at his old boots, feeling his heart race, muscles tense, mind filled with unspoken questions. Do I still deserve this? Do all those past goals, assists, spectacular passes still mean anything now that speed is gone? Explosiveness is gone, and the cheers have started turning to younger players? But every time he stepped onto the pitch, he still tried to smile, still pushed himself, still delivered assists, shots, surges to finish, as if challenging time, as if reminding himself that even if the body was no longer the same, his heart and will remained undefeated. The greatest tragedy for Totti in this phase was not the weakening body or having to give way to the new generation, but the realization that he was still present yet no longer belonged on the pitch, that the things that once built his reputation and pride no longer gave him a sense of belonging, and all that remained was a silent void in his heart that no goal, no assist, no cheer could fill. Every match was a tug-of-war between the desire to win and the fear of failure, between pride and the feeling of being left behind, between extraordinary will and the harsh reality of his body. Totti knew he still had to rise, still had to walk, still had to give, but also knew that time had placed him in a tragedy without solution, a pitch where he existed but no longer fully belonged, and every run, every shot now was recorded, not just by the goal, but by the will to fight himself and the cruelty of time. And in the final moments of every match, when Totti looked up at the stands, saw the flags, the loving eyes, the words of encouragement, he realized that true strength was not in speed, explosiveness, or technique, but in still existing, still fighting, still bringing joy to Roma, even knowing he was no longer the man he once was. That greatness is not measured only by titles or goals, but also by the ability to face decline, by rising after every season, by turning pressure and pain into beautiful final moments for those who had loved and believed in him. After many years of devotion, Francesco Totti began to realize a painful truth he never imagined. Roma, the home he had protected and loved his whole life, was starting to leave him before he could leave it. The leadership changed. New faces appeared in the locker room. Tactical decisions and player choices no longer revolved around him as before, and step by step, match by match, Totti felt his role shrinking, his influence on the pitch no longer absolute, and the light he once cast over every corner of the Olimpico now grew dim. Every run, every surge to finish, every past assist that had once been proof of his power and status now became a quiet effort, as if to remind everyone that he still existed, but the wordless pain grew larger. The home he had defended his entire life, the place that had nurtured him since he was a boy running on Rome's streets, the place that had witnessed every goal, every dribble, every glorious moment, no longer needed him. Totti stood on the pitch, watching the young players sprint with full energy, and he understood that time had handed power over to them. He was still there, but no longer the center, no longer the heartbeat dictating the rhythm of the game, no longer the one creating decisive moments. The loneliness in his heart spread wide, a quiet pain seeping in like Rome's drizzle, gradually soaking into every muscle, every heartbeat. The cheers from the stands still rang out, but they were no longer solely for him. Flags, chants, loving eyes began to turn toward younger faces, the ones who would inherit the history. And Totti knew that even though he had given everything, the home he loved had found new masters, and that felt like a knife sinking deep into the heart of a legend. In the locker room, Totti looked around, seeing new boots, the numbered 10 shirt still bearing his name, but gradually losing its power. New contracts, new tactical decisions that no longer revolved around him. And he felt clearly that he was standing between two worlds still belonging to Roma, still called Il Capitano, but no longer the center, no longer the one controlling the breath of the match. And step by step, day by day, his heart had to face the truth that the home he had protected, loved, and turned his entire life into a symbol, no longer needed him. This tragedy was not about losing titles, not about declining form or speed, but about the feeling of losing spiritual ground, losing his role in a space where he had once been everything. Every goal, every assist, every cheer now seemed to remind him of isolation, of age, of time that could not be turned back, and of an emptiness that no title or achievement could fill. Totti still stepped onto the pitch, still smiled at the fans, still finished and assisted like before, but in every glance, every run, every movement, the perceptive observer would notice the deep loneliness and pain. He still existed but no longer belonged on the grass. And this pain, silent yet impossible to hide, was the first peak of emotion in his tragic journey. On those training afternoons, when sunlight poured through the red-tiled roofs and gentle breezes swept across the grass, Totti sat alone, looking at the ball at his feet, imagining moments from the past, watching young players run faster, jump higher, shoot more accurately, and understanding that the power, influence, and vitality of a legend are all temporary. Every pain, every quiet loneliness, every feeling of no longer belonging to the place he had been tied to became a mental burden he had to carry. But Totti remained resilient, still stepped onto the pitch, still fought, still gave every piece of his heart, because he knew that loyalty, even if it was a prison, was what made him a legend. And he could not abandon Roma, could not abandon the fans, could not abandon the belief that this love, even as it turned into pressure, was the only reason for him to keep living and playing. In every match, even though his body had slowed, even though his heartbeat was weary, even though goals no longer rang out as powerfully as before, Totti still stood firm, still gave everything, still left his mark on every pass, every assist, every shot, to remind everyone that true strength is not in speed or absolute technique, but in existing, fighting, and carrying an unbreakable will. And in that loneliness and pressure, he was still Il Capitano, the king of a kingdom only he truly understood, where love, loyalty, and devotion became shackles, but also precisely what created an irreplaceable legend. When the final whistle blew at the Olimpico, when the ball came to rest at its last position in the match and the crowd began to disperse, Francesco Totti did not just leave the pitch. He stepped into a void he had never imagined, a place where football was no longer everything, where the title Il Capitano, the immortal symbol, no longer attached to every run, every assist, every finish as before. Retirement was not just a career decision, it was an ending, a silent breaking that only Totti understood, because for 25 years of devotion, football had been his life, his home, his breathing, his heartbeat, and now, without the ball, without the fans, without the grass, he realized a painful truth no one could prepare for. He had never learned how to be a person outside of football. In the early days after hanging up his boots, Totti felt as if he had been stripped completely bare, without identity, without role. and an emptiness spread through his mind. Every moment in bed or in the empty room reminded him of an irreplaceable loss, of goals that had passed, assists he had made, shears that had rung out, and now were only memories. Every step at home, every footfall on the floor, made him remember that he had once been the center of a world. But now there was no world left to command, and that sense of disorientation, of lost identity, left him confused, adrift, like a child stepping into the light for the first time without having learned how to breathe. Football had once been the only thing Totti knew how to exist in, the only thing that defined who he was, and when it vanished, every marker of recognition, every pride, every sense of belonging dissolved. Il Capitano was gone. Francesco Totti was now just an empty man, standing amid the walls of memories, looking at himself in the mirror, and realizing that outside of football he had never learned how to live, never learned how to be a father, never learned how to be an ordinary person, and the fear of losing identity, the fear of not knowing where to start, weighed heavily on every heartbeat. In those quiet months, Totti tried to find meaning beyond the pitch. He walked the streets of Rome, watched children play ball, heard distant cheers, felt every brick, every tiled roof he had run across his whole life. But the air still felt strange, empty. He tried attending meetings, events, meeting old teammates, but his heart and mind still craved those moments on the field. The roars, the instants when he had been the center. Every time he held a ball, he remembered decisive moments in matches, remembered lifting cups. But now his hands were no longer agile, his eyes no longer sharp, and his will, though intact, still struggled to find a way to live in a life that no longer had the pitch as its center. The silent truth that Totti had to face was this: he had never learned how to live with himself when football was gone, never learned how to move forward when the pride and title tied to an entire city vanished, never prepared for the profound loneliness in his soul that he had never known before. On those long nights in the empty room, when the faint light shone on the medals, the photos, the old balls, he realized he was facing an entirely new match, without referees, without spectators, without teammates, where he had to learn to stand up, to walk, and to live without the pitch being everything. In that loneliness, Totti's will was tested more than in any match before. He had to tell himself that the love for Roma and for football was no longer the only reason to exist, that he had to find joy and meaning beyond the pitch. And even though his heart still ached with every memory, every goal, every assist, he knew this was the time to learn how to become a real person, with fears, hopes, new responsibilities, and most importantly, to learn to accept that sometimes even a legend needs to step off the field, to look at life through the eyes of an ordinary person. Totti began to understand that retirement was not just the end of a glorious career, but also an opportunity to rediscover himself, to learn how to live with what remained, to continue loving and giving in a different way, and to realize that fame, legend, or the title Il Capitano could never replace the joy of living, family love, and inner peace that he had never experienced when everything was tied to football. And from that emptiness, Totti started a new journey of learning to live, learning to move forward, learning to love life without the pitch as its center, yet still carrying in his heart all the memories, all the glories, and all the pains that had made him a legend. After retirement, and facing the inescapable void that football left behind, Francesco Totti realized that, amid all the loneliness and emptiness, only one thing kept him standing: family. Family became the only thing left, the place where he knew that even without being Il Capitano, even without the Olimpico, even if all the lights, cheers, titles, or legend disappeared, there were still people who needed him. People whose love did not demand perfection, did not count goals or assists, only required him to be himself. And it was from family that Totti found the reason to breathe, to live, to keep going each day. His marriage to Ilari Blasi was not just an ordinary romantic relationship. It was the union of two people who could see each other through both the spotlight and the darkness. Ilari was not only his wife, but also his companion, a solid emotional anchor when Totti faced pressure, the sense of lost identity after retirement, and all the silent wounds left by time, injury, and loneliness. In those early difficult days, when Totti stepped off the pitch for the last time, when the title Il Capitano became only a memory, Ilari became the guiding light, the only presence reminding him that he still had value, that he still mattered to someone, that there was still reason to keep going. Their three children, Christian, Chanel, and Isabel, became the new heartbeat in Totti's life. Every time he saw those clear eyes, innocent smiles, and wobbly steps of his kids, Totti felt a new strength, a necessity greater than any goal or title before. The children were not just a gift, but the reason for him to wake up early every day, to train, to care, to live fully even when his body had weakened and his mind sometimes felt lost in the emptiness of life after football. Totti knew that every moment with his children, every little soccer practice, every bedtime story, was more precious than any glory on the pitch. And it was the love for his children that gave him the strength to stand firm, to face every storm, every loneliness, every void that retirement had left in his soul. Family became the remaining part of Totti's life, the anchor that held him when everything else in the football world had left him. In the warm home, when the evening light streamed through the windows and the children's laughter echoed through the rooms, Totti felt a peace that football could never bring, an unconditional love that titles or legends could never buy. Every evening when he read to his children, every time he held their hands for a walk, Totti seemed to rediscover the part of himself lost in the years of chasing glory, rediscovering life from simple joys, from innocent laughter, from family love, something that had once been overshadowed by football and pressure throughout his career. Totti also realized that thanks to family, he learned to accept things he had never dared face before: the failure to win international titles, the missed goals, the opportunities he turned down to stay loyal to Roma, and the long-lasting loneliness on the pitch. He understood that all of these, though still existing in memory and sometimes aching, could not break the love for those by his side. And that very love helped him keep living, helped him stand strong, helped him find true meaning beyond football. Every time Totti watched his children play ball on the nearby field or heard their clumsy questions, he saw the image of himself as a boy on the streets of Rome, saw the dreams, the hopes, and the suppressed pressure. But this time, instead of carrying the responsibility of an entire city, he carried the responsibility of a father, a husband, a human being, and in that responsibility he found new joy, new strength, and healing for every silent wound that retirement had left. Family became the reason for Totti to keep fighting, not on the pitch, but in life, to love, to teach, to show his children that loyalty, sacrifice, and resilience exist not only in football but in every person's life. And it was from those days with family that Totti realized that although he had lost the title Il Capitano, left the Olimpico, was no longer the center of every eye on the field. He was still the most important person in a small but deeply meaningful world, where love and attachment to loved ones became the strength to live, to give, and to exist. Family was not just a refuge, but the place where he learned to breathe again, to move forward, to love, without needing to prove anything to the world. And this very thing turned them into the remaining part of his life, where Totti found everything football could not give: joy, love, and the reason to keep living every day. The seemingly peaceful years that appeared to stretch on after retirement, when Francesco Totti had learned to slow down, to breathe fully with his family, and to find meaning in his children's smiles, were suddenly shattered by a shock he could not control. the divorce from Ilari Blasi. This blow did not come from a match, not from a goal or a defeat on the pitch, but from the very home he had spent his entire life protecting, from the wife and children he considered his reason for living, from the only place where he had felt safe after all those years of loneliness and pressure. Simmering conflicts, signs of betrayal, rumors, and the relentless scrutiny of the media suddenly turned into a storm crashing into Totti's life, sweeping away everything he had ever known, every belief he had built, and plunging him into utter devastation, a broken family, a once safe haven now aching and empty, and him standing amid the wreckage with no pitch, no Roma, and now no family either. In the first days after the news broke, Totti felt a pain that football, titles, or legend had never prepared him for. No one could shield his heart from the feeling of being abandoned right where he had once found absolute happiness. Every silent tear falling on his pillow, every sigh in the empty room, every moment watching his children play without being able to laugh with them, reminded him that he had lost everything, one piece at a time. The pain was not just separation. It was the realization that everything he had devoted his life to preserving, everything he had trusted and believed in, no longer existed in the form he knew, and what had once felt solid had become painfully fragile. The Italian media drowned Totti in articles, in comments dissecting every tiniest detail, and this public exposure intensified his loneliness, leaving him with nowhere to hide, no corner to protect himself, and a spreading sense of helplessness. He, the man who once controlled the rhythm of matches, who was once the center of an entire city, now became a figure judged, scrutinized, and overwhelmed by chaos he could not control. Every glance from old friends, every whisper in the media, every face in the crowd when they saw him at events felt like a reminder that power, fame, and the glorious years on the pitch could not protect him from private pain, that everything he had once believed in could collapse, and no goal could ever heal a shattered heart. His children, the reasons Totti kept living after leaving the pitch, now became the only motivation for him to stand firm amid the mental storm. Yet even in that love, the quiet pain seeped in, because no one could compensate for the loss of a broken home, and every laugh from them was mixed with the memory of complete moments that were gone forever. On those quiet evenings, when he read to his children, when he held their hands walking around Rome, Totti felt an emptiness he had never known while playing. The feeling of existing yet losing, of having to be strong yet resilient, of having to hide a loneliness only he knew. This tragedy went far beyond any physical injury or pressure from the pitch. It was mental anguish, loneliness in the home that had once been a refuge, emptiness where his heart had once found happiness, and powerlessness upon realizing that no goal, no assist, no title, no legend could save him from the collapse of his family. Totti lost everything one by one: the title Il Capitano, his glorious career, the familiar grass, the Roma he loved, and now the family home he had built. And in that loss, his will was tested to the extreme, forcing him to find new strength, forcing him to learn to rise from the ruins of his life, forcing him to find reasons to live beyond football, beyond titles, beyond what the world once admired. In his most painful moments, when the training ground lights no longer illuminated childhood dreams, and the cheers only echoed in memory, Totti realized that the deepest pain did not come from losing titles or being replaced by the younger generation, but from losing the most precious things: home, stability, trust, and the belief that he could protect what mattered. This was the second, most powerful emotional peak in Totti's tragic journey, where fans did not just witness a legend pulled from the pitch, but a man facing total loss, having to learn to move forward, to love what remained, to survive when everything that had made his life had vanished. And from that uttermost pain, Totti began to realize that loyalty, sacrifice, and deep love, even if they could be shackles, were also the only things keeping him standing. Every step beside his children, every quiet laugh, every moment of care and teaching became proof of inner strength, of unbreakable will, and of the ability to survive after losing everything. No pitch, no glory, no title could replace the power that family and love brought. After the shock of the divorce and the inevitable changes at Roma, Francesco Totti stepped into a world he had never had to face before. An empty world with no roaring crowds, no Olympico floodlights, no cheers echoing through every wall. A place where everything that once made him feel alive had disappeared, leaving only silence, a silence deeper than any cheer, so profound it reminded him that even though he had once been the center, once the king of a city, now he was just a stripped-down human being, without titles, without power, and without a pitch to stand on. In the empty room, Totti sat looking out at the training ground as darkness began to fall, and he realized that every breath, every heartbeat, every movement of his own now echoed louder in his mind than the cheers of tens of thousands ever had, and that silence became the loudest sound he had ever heard, louder than any roar, louder than any title, louder than all the goals he had scored. As the days passed, Totti learned to live with a loneliness he had never experienced in his 25 years on the pitch. Every quiet moment in the Rome house, every silent afternoon when sunlight streamed through the window, reminded him that fame, power, and legend could not soothe these spiritual voids. Whenever he looked at old photos, every goal, every assist, every fan's gaze from the past echoed in memory, reminding him that he once had it all, but now only himself remained. And that loneliness became the final, most cruel test of a legend's will, one he had never had to endure before. In those quiet evenings, Totti often sat in the living room, his hand resting on old balls, gazing out at the street where the boy once ran and jumped, listening to the gentle wind rustling through the window, and feeling the silence spreading through his entire body. He realized that during all those years of playing, he had never known absolute stillness, that every cheer, every clap had masked the loneliness. And now, when everything had quieted down, that silence rang louder than any medal, any goal, any title he had ever won. Silence is louder than fame. This silence reminded Totti of the fragility of everything he once considered immortal, that all the power, all the glory, all the love from the city could not save him from this emptiness. But in that loneliness, Totti also found something profound, the ability to face himself that he had never had the chance to do before. He began to realize that true strength did not come from goals, from titles, or from the love of the crowd, but from accepting the void, learning to live with it, and finding meaning in what remained. The love for his children, the connection with family, and the mental resilience to survive despite loss. Every step in the room, every time he watched his children sleep, every moment reading bedtime stories became proof that, even in silence, even in loneliness, Totti still existed, still fought, still found reasons to keep living. This loneliness also reminded Totti of the true value of loyalty and love. When he turned down every offer from big clubs, when he chose to stay with Roma, he had accepted a long-lasting solitude, and now, in the emptiness after the pitch was gone, he realized that the price of loyalty was not just international titles, but also a life of facing silence. And day by day, hour by hour, Totti learned to turn silence into strength, loneliness into resilience, loss into gratitude for what remained, so that every smile, every hug from his children, every moment with family became evidence of his will to survive, of the quiet, extraordinary nature of a legend who once captured the heart of an entire city, but now had to learn to claim his own self. In the silence, Totti stood up, walked, talked to himself, realizing that every cheer, every floodlight, Every title that once made him hold his head high was only temporary, but the love for his family, the love for Roma, and the loyalty to what he had chosen lived on forever. Silence became a lesson, became the final teacher, teaching him that a legend is also human, and to survive after everything, sometimes you have to learn to live without the crowd, without the spotlight, needing only to know that you still stand firm in your own heart. After months immersed in loneliness, amid a silence where the Olimpico cheers no longer echoed, Francesco Totti began an entirely new journey, learning to live again, not on the pitch, not with glory or titles, but with himself and his family, with the simple values he had never had time to feel before. Being a father became the new heartbeat, the reason to open his eyes every morning, the motivation to smile, to speak, to love without calculation. The heavy steps on the pitch had been replaced by slow steps down the hallway at home, afternoons walking with the children, times teaching them soccer on the small lawn, where he was no longer il capitano, but simply a father, a guide, and a support for those innocent eyes full of trust in the world. Totti learned to live slowly, every breath, every moment experienced fully. He realized that life no longer demanded scoring goals or assisting, but demanded presence, care, love. Every story read to the children, every laugh following them running on the field, every hug when evening fell became the new rhythm of life, bringing healing to the silent wounds left by retirement, leaving the pitch and the shock of divorce. No longer trying to return, no longer chasing any peak, Totti simply tried to exist, day by day, hour by hour, with everything that remained and everything he could control, his health, his family, and the peaceful moments with those he loved. In the process of learning to survive, Totti had to face harsh truths. His body was no longer flexible, his legs no longer sharp, his heartbeat no longer racing like when scoring at the Olimpico, and the memories of titles, legend, fan love were now just echoes touching his heart, but could no longer lift him as before. He realized that the fame and power that once made him feel invincible were now fleeting, and to keep living, he had to learn to accept that life no longer involved proving his worth to the world, but preserving himself and the precious relationships around him. Every morning, Totti started the day with self-care routines, light workouts, planning playtime with the children, reading, storytelling, and listening to their innocent laughter. These seemingly simple actions became his lifeline, proof of learning to exist without the pitch as the center, and in every such minute he found a peace he had never felt before, a peace from accepting reality, from knowing there was nothing left to prove to anyone, only to live, only to love, and only to be himself. As the days passed, Totti realized that being a father was not just responsibility, but spiritual salvation. The smiles, the questions, the innocent runs of his children became the drive to keep going, the new breath for a heart once exhausted after years of battling pressure, expectations, and himself. His presence with them was proof of learning to live again, learning to love without needing the spotlight, learning to be joyful without needing victory. In this process, Totti also learned to accept what had been lost: international titles, global glory, the central role at Roma, and the once intact family home. He understood that suffering, loss, and personal tragedies are inseparable parts of life, and that the ability to survive, to learn to live again after every storm, is true strength. Every day, he turned pain and loneliness into motivation to be present, to give, and to continue the journey of living no longer il capitano on the pitch, but Francesco Totti, the father, the man, the survivor after everything that once made the legend. Totti learned to cherish every moment, every smile, every quiet afternoon with the children, every slow step through Rome, and realized that life does not need to be glorious to have meaning. Meaning lies in presence, in love, in the resilience to keep living, even knowing that titles, the pitch, and the legendary lights would never return as before. Learning to live again is learning to accept limits, learning to find joy in simple things, and learning to exist with all the wounds, losses, loneliness, and pressures that had shaped who he was. And from those days of living slowly, Totti stepped into a new chapter. No more glory, no more pitch, no more eyes following every run. But he still stood firm, still existed, and most importantly, still loved, still gave, still was the father. The man whose remaining life was defined by himself, by his ability to survive and accept reality, and by the complete love he gave to those around him, to Rome, and to his family, the thing that kept him breathing, kept him living, and kept him becoming a legend in his own quiet yet extraordinary way. Francesco Totti no longer steps onto the pitch. The floodlights and cheers no longer shine or echo around him, but his image remains deeply etched in the hearts of millions, and in his slow steps, in every smile he gives his children, Totti carries a different kind of glory, a glory not measured by goals, titles, or medals, but by loyalty, resilience, and the profound love he gave to Roma, to his family, and to his own life. He is not the greatest in the way the world usually defines it, not the one with European titles or international awards etched on golden boards, but Totti is the most loyal, the one who gave everything to one city, one team, one ideal, and in doing so, he loved so deeply that he endured every loss, every loneliness, every pressure that no other legend ever experienced in quite the same way. Every season, every match, every goal Totti scored was not just a number, not just an entry on the score sheet, but proof of endurance, of sacrifice, and of the love he poured out completely. When he stood on the Olympical pitch, the team and fans saw him as a legend, a king of the city. But Totti himself knew that behind it all were unseen drops of sweat, painful training sessions, silent loneliness, and years of fighting himself, his betraying body, and irreversible time. In every moment, he gave everything, strength, heart, belief, and youth itself. And in return, he received not only glory, but also profound losses few could imagine. Some legends win everything, those who claim titles, money, and admiration. But Francesco Totti belongs to the second kind. Others give everything he gave, all he had, every effort, every emotion, every sacrifice, and as a result, he lost more than anyone ever saw. He lost international titles, lost the chance to go global, lost speed and explosiveness, lost his intact home after the shock of divorce, lost the sense of belonging on the pitch, lost absolute power at the Olimpico, and often lost inner peace when watching others receive opportunities he had turned down. Yet he still stood firm, still walked forward, still loved, still taught his children, still cared for his family, and still held his love for Roma. And it is precisely that unconditional giving, that sacrifice, that makes the legend of Totti immortal. In Totti's eyes, when watching his children run on the small lawn, when laughing with his family, when reading bedtime stories, we can see his true strength, not the strength of goals or perfect shots, but the strength of a man who lived, loved, and gave completely, despite every loss, despite every pain, despite a lifetime of loneliness. He learned to stand firm not because of the spotlight, but because of endurance, because of love, because of loyalty. And in the silence, in quiet afternoons with his children, in every simple moment he had never cherished before, Totti found the meaning of an entire life, a life not meant to be remembered by titles, but recognized by love, by loyalty, by living fully with what he chose and what he loved. Totti needs no floodlights, no cheers, no medals to prove his worth. What he left behind is a lesson in how to love and live honestly, in how to become the center of a city while keeping your own identity, in how to give and sacrifice without expecting reward, and in how to stand strong when everything the world values has vanished. In the eyes of fans, Totti is still Il Capitano, still the legend. But in his own heart, true value is the ability to rise after every fall, to love when hurt, to keep living when everything is lost, and to pass on to the next generation the values of loyalty, love, and will. Every smile, every hug, every lesson to his children becomes proof of unconditional strength and love. Every assist, every goal on the pitch is now only memory. But that memory lives forever in his heart, and in the hearts of those who witnessed it. Totti gave everything and lost more than anyone ever saw. But that very giving makes him the greatest legend of loyalty and love. And when the story ends, the message rings clear. Some legends win everything, others give everything. And Francesco Totti gave everything and lost more than anyone ever saw. He is not the greatest legend by the world's measure, but by the measure of loyalty, sacrifice, and profound love. He is an immortal monument, a man who lived fully, and a symbol who overcame every tragedy, every pain, every loss, to show us that greatness is not what you receive, but what you dare to give, no matter the consequences. The story of Francesco Totti is not just the journey of a football legend, but living proof of the price of loyalty, profound love, and absolute devotion. When looking back on his entire life, from the childhood days tied to Rome, bearing the pressure of becoming the city's hope, to turning down Real Madrid to stay loyal to AS Roma for life, then facing the final years with a weakening body, injuries, the pressure of the younger generation taking over, and finally the shock of divorce that broke his family, one cannot help but feel sorrow for a man who loved and sacrificed too much. Every moment Totti stood on the pitch, every goal, every assist, every brilliant shot was not just a sporting achievement, but proof of unbreakable will, of endurance through unseen loneliness and pressure he carried. Even after retirement, when football was no longer the center of his life, he still learned to slow down, to be a father, to care for his family, to rediscover value beyond the pitch, showing an extraordinary inner strength. Totti is not the greatest player by titles, but he is the symbol of unconditional loyalty and love. A man who gave everything and lost more than anyone ever saw. The lesson for us, especially for American audiences, is that true value lies not in success or power, but in honesty, resilience, and the ability to live with what we love, care for, and protect, even when life takes away more than we imagine, and that sometimes the greatest strength is not victory, but how we rise, keep loving, and live fully, even when everything around us falls apart. If the story of Totti's extraordinary journey has touched your heart, please hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapters full of emotion and other legends.